Have you ever played a game that was so good you wanted, no, you needed to play more of the genre? That happened to me after I finished playing Astrobot for the first time. The game came out in September of 2024, and it's a platforming game made by Team Asobi and published by Sony PlayStation. I've played through it twice. The first time, I 100% of the game, as well as earning my Platinum Trophy. And after finishing it, I was left with this itch in me. I haven't played such a platform heavy game since I was a kid, and I admit that even when I was growing up, platforming games were already starting to fade out. But this got me to go back and look at those games that I remember so fondly. For anyone not familiar with Astrobot, I will summarize the game, and for those that are already familiar, you can skip to the timestamp I have included on the screen here. I'll also try to figure out how to do chapters and insert a bookmark for you. So back to Astrobot. You start off flying around in space with 300 other bots in your mothership that looks exactly like a PlayStation 5. You're attacked by an alien that destroys your ship and scatters the bots across space. You travel to 5 different galaxies recovering ship parts and bots that have gone missing. And in these galaxies are a host of planets and side missions to visit. While saving these bots, some of the planets will have a gimmick to change up the gameplay from just jumping and spinning. Along with the bots, there are puzzle pieces and secret exits to find hidden on the planets. Each galaxy, apart from the secret planet galaxy, has a boss fight that leads you to saving a bot or two that is a character very important to PlayStation's history. Once the VIP bot is saved, you are taken to a planet themed around this character that brings a unique gameplay mechanic paying homage to that game. After defeating all the bosses, you get to take on the alien from the beginning of the game that stole the CPU of your mothership. And that's Astrobot. It's a good, tight platformer that brings in gimmick movement items that never overstay their welcome. My personal favorite is the mouse outfit that allows you to shrink to miniature size. There is only one level with it, and if anything, I wish that the game had more levels with these gimmicks. If you're familiar with Astrobot, is there a gimmick that you enjoy the most? And if there is, let me know down in the comments. But like I said, overall, it's a great, fun game. And this is something we need more of in today's gaming landscape. Now, without wasting too much more time, let's get to why you clicked on this video. Each game I will talk about is one game of a series. Maybe one day I can cover each game's respective series, but for now I want to stick to the game that I think is closest to Astrobot, as well as being the best jump-in point for anyone unfamiliar with the series. So for my first recommendation, it's just going to be Astro's Playroom. It's the game Team Asobi made before Astrobot. It's a tech demo for the PlayStation 5, and it's just more Astrobot. It's a much shorter experience, but it's also free on PS5, so you don't have an excuse to not play it if you own a PlayStation. So go on and get it. But with that out of the way, let's get into some full game experiences that I can recommend for y'all. We're going to be diving into PlayStation's early 2000s trinity of platformers, and the first one has 14 mainline games, all of them being able to be played on the PlayStation 5, as of today, January 13th, 2025. And for those of you unfamiliar, I'm talking about Ratchet and Clank. My personal favorites in the series are Going Commando, Deadlocked, and Rift Apart. The one we'll be talking about today is the newest edition, released in 2021, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. This game and series as a whole focuses on a lot more of the gunplay aspect of the game rather than platforming, and that may seem counterintuitive to my point of games similar to Astrobot, but stay with me. Astrobot has incredible worlds with vibrant colors to explore, very similar to the Ratchet and Clank games. And I've played multiple games from the series, including the original Ratchet and Clank, Going Commando, Deadlocked, some of A Crack in Time, Ratchet and Clank 2016, as well as Rift Apart. Each game brings something new to the series, but Rift Apart elevates everything about it. This includes the best gunplay, the best enemy AI, and the best platforming the series has to offer. Pretty early into the game, you're given some rocket boots as well as a dodge that allow you to move very, very quickly. There are some portions of the game in which you can completely bypass intended platforming sections if you know how to use the rocket boots properly. The enemies are also much better at tracking you and leading their shots. In previous entries to the Ratchet and Clank series, enemies had trouble finding you and hitting you. The easiest way to deal with them was to circle strafe them. Now enemies are better at hitting you. But that leads to another problem of the new gameplay feeling frustrating, because you're constantly being shot. This is why a phantom dash is introduced very early into the game. It allows you to phase through some laser doors as well as enemy fire. This, along with the arsenal of weapons that Ratchet receives, makes the gunplay tight, challenging, and fun. With these weapons, you make your way through the game, gunning through each world, defeating the bad guys, and unlocking new guns to shoot even more bad guys. The gunplay is broken up by some big platforming sections and Clank puzzles, so that you never feel too tired of the run and gun gameplay. The story isn't very important to me, but includes witty dialogue that isn't overbearing, with enough emotion to make you care about the characters. Once I had finished the game, I immediately fired up a New Game Plus to start unlocking upgraded versions of the weapons along with their respective skill trees. It is the best game in the series in my opinion, and the best place to jump in for anyone not familiar with the franchise or someone who's been away for a while. With all of that being said, let's see how the two games stack up to each other. Now, how does Ratchet and Clank differ from Astro Bot? As I mentioned earlier, Ratchet and Clank focuses a lot more on the gunplay aspect versus the platforming aspect. Whereas in Astro Bot, you run, jump, spin, and punch, Ratchet and Clank focuses way more heavily on shooting bad guys. Another aspect is the puzzles. Astro Bot may have a few hidden details that you could classify as puzzles, where Ratchet and Clank has sections dedicated to using your mind to figure out how to progress through the game. And finally, Ratchet and Clank has a story. I know Astro Bot has a structure, but Ratchet and Clank has a story involving a new character named Rivet. I won't dive too much into the story as I think you should experience it yourself, but it is something fun to keep you engaged with playing the game. How are the games similar? Vibrant colors with beautiful planets. Astro Bot has you going from planet to planet in each galaxy, each with a distinctly different vibe and tone and color. Ratchet and Clank is very similar. Each planet you go to is distinctly different from every other planet you've been to, with a different tone and new colors. Like I mentioned, there's an immediate replayability factor with both games. For different reasons though. Ratchet and Clank leads you to want to play more because each gun can be upgraded further in a New Game Plus. Whereas with Astro Bot, I just wanted more Astro Bot. And the final reason that I think they're both very similar is platforming that makes you feel like a speedrunner. As I mentioned earlier, Ratchet and Clank has a set of rocket boots that helps you bypass whole sections of platforming if you know where they are and how to use them. Astro Bot can be very similar. If you're unfamiliar with platforming, you follow the intended path that the game developers put along for you. The developers also strung them along perfectly so that if you're familiar with the mechanics, you can skip sections if you know how to jump and spin, which I appreciate. It's easy for people who are not familiar to get into, but for people with more expertise, it's easy for them to play faster. And that's why I think these games are more similar than they may appear. Now that we've talked about the newest entry from an early 2000s platformer, let's talk about another one. And let's go back to the 2000s, moving away from weaponry, but we'll keep the tiny sidekick. This will bring us to the first Jak and Daxter game, Jak and Daxter: The Precursor Legacy. Of the games that I'm going to talk about today, this will be the most similar to Astro Bot. The game is heavily tied to collection, platforming, and gimmick sections to break up the game. To move through the game, you are tasked with collecting power cells that will allow you to make progress in the game. This forces you to explore the environments and make sure you don't miss too much, because if you do, you will need to go back and find them. All progress depends on how many power cells you find.
Good! You've collected enough power cells to fuel my heat shield. Meet me by the entrance to the fire canyon by climbing the cliff behind the farmer's house.
It's very similar to collecting bots to progress through Astro Bot. The game is well balanced between platforming and minigames. Sometimes the minigames can drag on, like the zoomer sections have always frustrated me. Even when I was a kid, I didn't like them because it felt so unwieldy. When I loaded up my PS5 to play through it again for this video, I disliked the sections again and thought, maybe it's because I'm playing on an emulated version. That's why it feels weird, because I had noticed that some of the jumping and action inputs felt delayed. So I booted up my PlayStation 2 to play through, and I still struggled to get the zoomer to control well. Maybe I just suck at zoomer sections? I really don't understand it, Did anyone else struggle with this when they were a kid or even now as an adult? Because the game is made for kids and I'm still struggling as an adult to play through the sections. But besides the zoomerang, platforming feels awesome with environments that all feel so distinct and engaging. The humor can sometimes feel very early 2000s.
What? Okay, I'm fine.
But that can be a great thing with nostalgia that brings you back to feeling like a kid. That being said, a lot of the jokes do hold up well, but Daxter can get annoying with how often he talks.
I'm fine.
The rest of the game has a good tone and definitely feels kid-friendly with some serious elements mixed in closer to the end. When comparing the two games, there's not too many differences besides the actual way that the platforming works. In Jak and Daxter, you have a double jump, whereas in Astrobot, you have a jump and hover. Of PlayStation's trinity of early 2000s platformers, this game will be the closest you can get to Astrobot. It even has a secret ending if you get all the collectibles, just like Astrobot. And with that brings us to the third part of our trinity of platformers. And this game may be a dark horse candidate. It certainly was the little brother to these two previous games I mentioned, but this series and game holds a special place in my heart, being the game and series that I have beaten more times than any other game I've played combined. Once a year, I come back to play the second game in particular, and I'm talking about the one and only Sly Cooper. Sly Cooper is the little brother to Ratchet and Jak. The game's always undersold compared to them, but you might not know that if you're a part of gaming Twitter. The Sly fandom is very loud about how much they love the games and want more of them. And we don't talk about Sly 4. All jokes aside, Sly 2 Band of Thieves is my favorite in the series. You follow Sly and his friends on their mission to steal the Clockwork parts in an attempt to keep Clockwork from ever coming back. When you get to the parts in the opening mission, you realize they've already been stolen by a criminal organization called the Claw Gang. Your mission then becomes to track down all the members of the Claw Gang and steal the parts back. This involves reconnaissance missions, sabotage, and general thievery. The members of the squad are Sly, the thief, Bentley, the brains and demolitions expert, and Murray, the muscle and getaway driver. Every chapter involves an intel mission, leading to 2 rounds of missions setting up the heist, crescendoing with that final heist. Some of these final heist missions lead to a confrontation with a member of the Claw Gang, but not always. Sometimes the bad guy just gets away and that's how the game goes until the final confrontation. The actual gameplay is different from both of the previous games mentioned. This stems from the fact that each character has distinctly different playstyles. Sly is sneaky, relying on the art of surprise and stealth to take out his enemies. Bentley relies on his technology and bombs to solve problems, where Murray uses brute strength to make short work of any goon or obstacle. Sly also has the best movement controls in this game. He's able to easily scale pipes and sneak around ledges, which Bentley and Murray cannot. In my opinion, this game is the best of the PlayStation 2 era games, and where I would direct people first after finishing Astrobot. Let's compare the two games. While they do have quite a few differences, one of them being that instead of the normal action platforming that you have in Astrobot, in Sly Cooper you have stealth platforming. You're jumping behind enemies and around enemies to sneak around or get in a better vantage point to take them down. There's also a heavier focus on fighting in Sly Cooper. While in Astrobot you do punch a lot of your enemies or jump over them, the combat is not nuanced like it is in Sly Cooper. Take Murray for example. He normally has missions dedicated to fighting enemies, where Astrobot is more focused on finding bots and finishing a level. Some similarities between the games revolve around the amount of platforming. When you're playing Sly Cooper, you're constantly jumping. Whether it's up to the rooftops or around enemies, you're jumping and hitting the circle button to perform a ninja spire jump to get from one spire to another. There's a lot of running and jumping involved in this game, as well as gadgets that mix up the gameplay. Astrobot has gimmicks that allow you to change the way you actually perform your platforming. In Sly Cooper, there are gadgets that change the way that you do your platforming. Two of the bigger examples being the parachute or the alarm clock. With all that being said, I do think this is the game I would point people to first, mainly out of bias. It's my favorite of the 3 games I've talked about so far, so I want more people to play it. With that being said, that will bring my list to a close, and that's what I have for you. I've given you a couple games to go and try. Ratchet and Clank is the most dissimilar to Astrobot, but with the most modern game coming out in 2021. Jak and Daxter is the most similar, but with parts of the game that I would consider frustrating. And Sly is my favorite of the bunch, but the little brother to both series. Those are my thoughts. Have y'all played any of these games? Would you recommend them? Do you have other recommendations? Let me know how you guys feel, and let me know if I did these games justice. Thank you for listening this far. Please let me know anything else you all want to talk about regarding any of my videos. Hit the like button if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye ya.